creates questions the human mind cannot answer. Out of reach, past all we can see, hear, and touch, beyond all we understand, lies the extraordinary. The extraordinary is the strange aura that surrounds this ancient, grotesque doll.
When we first got him, yeah, I was petrified, you know. The night I got home, I left him in the lounge room, and halfway through the night I had to go and put him back in this bag and put him under the house.
Legend says the doll was made by wandering gypsies and is possessed by the restless spirit of a young boy who died in a flood hundreds of years ago.
I could feel this was a person. You could feel the aura of the doll. And I really believe that that doll possesses the aura of the person who created him. And when you're talking to the doll, you can feel a response. You can feel a communication from something or someone.
It is the unexplained power possessed by this woman to diagnose medical problems by way of a simple telephone conversation.
The back of your head, has there been a problem there?
Yeah.
I sort of feel that there's been a hole in the back of your head. Is that right?
Well, she told me about the hole in my head, and I was shocked. Like, no one could know that unless they've seen the x-rays.
Julie Lewin's power astounds the medical profession. The extraordinary is the house in Essex that actress Susanna York refuses to enter. Something to do with a drawbridge, a moat, and a young girl.
It was the classic story, a ghost, I suppose, of a lover and trying to meet her lover and unable to get out across the drawbridge.
It is the story of a dog called Rexy and her strange power that saved the lives of desperate people.
Rexy seemed to have like a sixth sense. If anybody put their leg over that fence, Rexy sensed that there was something wrong. She would come down to me, bark and carry on, and literally drag me up to the top. And every time I went up, somebody was over the fence.
Just some of the stories that lie beyond our normal understanding. Tonight on The Extraordinary.
More on that amazing dog a little later. Good evening. I'm Warwick Moss. More than 20 years ago, Kerry Walton found a doll under an abandoned home in southwest New South Wales. The house was said to be haunted, but that didn't worry Kerry at the time. However, as time passed, the doll started to take on a personality of its own. Kerry Walton began to feel himself falling under the spell of the grotesque doll, rumoured to have been made by wandering gypsies. From the dark and mystical days of Eastern Europe 200 years ago to the 20th century in Brisbane, Australia, a menacing gypsy doll, meticulously carved with every attention to every detail. The piercing eyes that somehow seemed to see all. The wig, plaited from real human hair. But was this effigy crafted with love, hate, or sorrow? This doll, some say, is possessed by the dead.
When we first got him, yeah, I was petrified, you know. The night I got home, I left him in the lounge room, and halfway through the night I had to go and put him back in this bag and put him under the house.
Possibly possessed by the dead. And maybe, just maybe, very much alive.
I could feel this was a person. You could feel the aura of the doll. And I really believe that that doll possesses the aura of the person who created him. And when you're talking to the doll, you can feel a response. You can feel a communication from something or someone.
Let's go back just a fragment in time to more than 20 years ago, to a deserted farmhouse in an Australian country town. Local legend has it the house is haunted, but 23-year-old Kerry Walton is bolstered by a youthful enthusiasm that overrides his fear.
And I was sort of under the house and with a torch, you know, still a bit frightened about going under there, and I shined the torch on this fella, and I nearly, you know, I thought it was a little kid, you know, and I bumped my head in the head on the joist, and then when I went over and had a closer look, there he was.
Driving home with the doll that night, Kerry began to have second thoughts about this piece of buried treasure he'd uncovered in that old haunted house.
When it was dark, every time a car went past, it looked like the doll was moving. I don't know if it was the lights, but that's what I put it down to.
That was the beginning. Who knows where it will all end? For more than 2 decades, Kerry Walton and his family have lived with this bizarre and mystifying relic from a bygone age. An age of witches, potions, and gypsy curses. Even in these enlightened times, some friends have fled in terror. Some swear its eyes change colour. Others are certain the doll moves unaided. As Kerry tried to explain in this interview from the early 1980s.
Has he affected other people the same way?
Oh, lots of people. Not many people like him.
Kerry's family weren't the only ones to sense something strange in the doll. Randolph, the family dog, attacked it on sight.
That film was shot more than 10 years ago. This is what happened when we taped a similar scene with a different dog just recently. A simple case of provocation. Natural canine fear. Not so, says Kerry Walton.
All dogs that's ever come in contact with this doll has tried to bite him.
Then came the day years ago when Kerry and his family decided they had to part with the doll. They were desperately in need of money, and they'd been offered $400 by a local shopkeeper. Kerry had sealed a deal by phone and was delivering the doll to the new owner.
Couldn't get him out of the car. No way. I just don't know why. I just could not take him out of the car. And as I said, we were really desperate. But it was something we were saying, you know, it's like don't take me or something like that.
Like it or not, the Waltons were stuck with their gypsy doll. The doll that seemed to have powers no one could explain. It was this tantalising mystery that set Kerry off on a voyage of discovery that would take him back more than 200 years. A voyage via science and seance that would provide some answers and pose new questions about the doll's ancestry.
I took it to the Australian Museum in Sydney, and they went over him and they had a look at the nails on the bottom of his soles here, and that's how they dated him, about 200 years old.
200 years old. Handmade, probably from somewhere in Eastern Europe. That was the scientific explanation. But who was the woodcarver, and what were his motives? First, an American psychic offered to try to unlock this secret from the doll's past.
And he said that the guy that made this doll made it in remembrance of his son that was drowned.
Then came a second psychic in Kerry's hometown of Brisbane in Queensland. Keisha became fascinated with the doll, its history, and the American psychic's theory. She organised her own seance and says she travelled back in time to a tragedy in Europe. A tragedy Keisha felt was still present in the doll today.
He was sad certainly sad. There is some sadness there. But sadness because, as we came up with, the drowning of a child somewhere. So that kind of sadness. So sometimes the doll becomes a child.
Keisha, too, noticed this attraction to water, the link to the drowning child. A link that in April 1981 she attempted to explain to an audience at a Brisbane shopping centre.
In broad daylight, in the shopping centre, thousands of people walking around, I told the story of the doll, pulled the lever, the curtains pulled back, women screamed, one woman passed out, somebody else threw up. Now you tell me, those people, at night time, yes, I've sat in ghost houses, I've stayed there all night, and I know that that night itself has an effect, but not in broad daylight, in a shopping centre with lots of noise. Those people were really scared, and the reason for that, he didn't like being there. He didn't like being made an exhibition, if you like. He didn't like that.
Somebody's sitting there very quietly. Someone's died.
There was also this appearance on the television program State Affair. On screen, Keisha seems to communicate with the doll, seems to have some kind of rapport with him. But off-screen, before the cameras started rolling...
Yes, well, we brought the doll to my office and we sat him on my lap because we were trying to figure out what was the best shot. And the doll wriggled. That was the first time, my first encounter with him. When he wriggled in my lap, just like a child wriggles to get settled in a mother's lap. So he wriggled. And of course I was terrified and I said, this doll is wriggling. And the guy said, oh, come on, you know. And then when one of the guys said, oh, come on, this is impossible, the doll, we would swear, turned its head. It creaked, the neck creaked, looked at the cameraman, the bulb blew.
A 200-year-old doll. A television light bulb exploding. So what, you may well ask? Well, more than 10 years after that first television encounter with Keisha, just the other day, in fact, we were taping with Kerry Walton and the doll. We just got to the part where Kerry tried to sell him, and...
So I put an ad in the paper for him only for $400. He lost a light.
Another exploding light bulb. Just a coincidence? Keisha has other ideas.
Well, I think it's because he was saying, oh, here we go again. These cameras, they're going to ridicule me. A memory. You and I have memories. Why shouldn't he? He is a real person. His energy is real. He has the energy of someone trapped in him. And he is real. So he would feel the emotions. If someone is ridiculing him, he gets angry. So I'd say that here he recognized cameras again, he recognized cameramen, and his mind would have gone back to the time when they ridiculed him, so he would have made it blow. There's no other reason. There's no other explanation.
Over the years, Kerry Walton and his family's attitude to the gypsy doll has changed, possibly by some of the circumstances you've just heard about. Little by little, the fears given way to respect, and more.
Well, we treat him well. You know, we've had him for 20-odd years now, but he's never grown up, you know. But he's probably looking for another father, you know, and mother. But no, we love him now.
I feel for that doll. I want to cuddle him. I want to take away all his pain. Which is what I feel. I feel the sadness in him, the sadness of losing a child. I really do.
There's no doubt this doll brings out powerful emotions in the people who meet him. But much of the 200-year-old mystery remains unsolved. Who is he? How did he travel thousands of kilometres across the world to Australia? And what secrets lurk behind that leering wooden mask? It seems only one thing is certain. After past experiences, the doll will always have a home with the Waltons.
I think he's already got that worked out. I don't think he's going anywhere, you know. I don't know what'll happen after we die. But we'll never get rid of him. You He's just become a part of the family. You just couldn't get rid of him. It'd be like you'd selling one of your kids.
Susanna York and her husband Michael Wells are not superstitious types. They're not afraid of the dark, and they don't panic when a black cat passes in front of them. But there is an old house in Essex where Susanna will never set foot again. Something to do with a drawbridge and a moat and a young girl who died many years ago.
Susanna York is the chameleon of Hollywood fantasy. She's played prim English ladies and sexual vamps without apparent effect or blemish to the integrity of her acting career. The industry gave her an Academy Award nomination for her role in They Shoot Horses, Don't They?
It's actually been a very mixed career. I mean, my goodness, I really had my ups and downs and continue to do so. I suppose the short answer is that you stretch. If you want something, if you want things very badly, you stretch. And you go further than you think you can. I happen to be extremely lucky.
Susanna is a pragmatic lady, not a strong believer in fate or the traditional forms of religion. But she has a definite sense of the spiritual.
No, I'm not full of mystical, strong beliefs. I always I feel that trees and flowers and things, I feel there's a livingness in, I love nature. I suppose probably the thing I get closest to religion is in nature, in my feeling for nature. And the spirit is not a still thing, it's not a dead thing, it's a living thing. One has a deep respect for spirit and for things spiritual and things of the spirit, which is life. I mean, life is the spirit.
Her awareness of things spiritual was sharpened years ago when something happened that left her perplexed and a little scared. It involved a castle, one she fell in love with and was preparing to buy with her husband, Michael. The castle proved to be anything but enchanting. It was a house with a history dating back hundreds of years, with the souls of people who perhaps never quite departed.
I was doing Man 4 Seasons, filming every day, and still married, and we were looking to buy a house in the country, and I'd heard about this one in Essex, which belonged to friends of friends. And the only way we could go up was to stay the night, stay over. Very romantic, very beautiful, this moated house, 17th century house. Had some supper out on the lawn, it was in the summer, and drank champagne, I think, and eventually went to bed.
But sometime, in the middle of the night, Susanna awoke. It was a very different world. A world inhabited by other entities. A castle inhabited by a force beyond her control.
And I woke and walked down the passage. I just couldn't go on down this long passage. It was like there was a wall in front of me. And after struggling to go beyond this moment along this wooden passage, I fainted. I must have fainted. I knocked over a very expensive, priceless Delft vase. In the morning, you know, we were going back, I just said, I know I couldn't live here. I couldn't live here because I would feel trapped. I couldn't get out. The only way to get out would be to dive out of a window and swim the moat. Because suppose the drawbridge didn't work, it got stuck and you couldn't let it down. The only way would be to, and I know I can't live in this house.
She doesn't know whether the house was haunted or if ghosts of the past somehow still live there. Whatever the explanation, Susanna later discovered that she had re-experienced the same event a young girl had experienced in the castle 200 years before.
Later on, we found out that there had been just such an event. A girl, it was a couple of hundred years before, had wanted to. It was the classic story, a ghost, I suppose, of a lover and trying to meet her lover and unable to get out across the drawbridge, and because and this feeling of blocking, and she jumped out of the window to jump the moat and to swim across the moat to him and drown. I mean, I wasn't trying to get past this block to meet my lover or to open the drawbridge, but I absolutely felt that I could not go out, and I was blocked, and I suppose I must have had a flash that the only way out of the situation would be out through the window and down and swim the moat.
Show, we met a young woman who appeared to have the ability to tell people all about themselves by reading their auras. Melissa seemed to diagnose the medical and physical abnormalities of strangers by moving her hands around their bodies. Tonight, we're going to meet another woman who also seems to have remarkable powers. Powers that doctors are finding difficult to explain.
It was weird. It wasn't so much being scared, but it was just a really weird feeling knowing that someone knew stuff about me that no one could possibly know.
A simple phone call from a woman Daniel De Silva had never met. A woman he would never even see.
Is that Daniel?
Yeah.
Daniel, it's Julie Lowen. How are you?
Yeah, I'm alright. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Just a few minutes on the phone. A few basic details, like his name.
D-A-S-I-L-V-A.
And his date of birth.
The 26th of the 1st, 78.
Then 15 minutes meditation. And Daniel discovers there is someone hundreds of kilometres away at the other end of a phone who knows more about him than many of his closest friends.
I felt kind of like someone was intruding on my life, like they were spying on me, like how could someone know this?
The intruder, invited by us with Daniel's consent, was Julie Lewin, a secretary who's become a psychic healer. Sometimes she does her readings in person, sometimes by phone. And in the experiments we set up, more often than not, Julie Lewin seemed to have an uncanny ability to tell her subjects just where their medical problems were.
About 10 years ago, I was encouraged to go and have an aura reading done by one of my friends. Much to my disinclination, I went along, and this fellow told me all sorts of things. One of the things that he told me was that I had a gift where I would be like X-ray vision. I could see inside of people and tell them what was wrong and do work on making them better, I suppose, or instructing them to be better.
It would be easy to dismiss Julie Lewin as a crank, but we found that even some doctors have asked for her help. Julie finds it difficult to explain her gift. She says at times it's like a movie passing before her eyes. A movie she forgets as soon as she's seen it.
When you're dreaming, you see things. So it's like a dream and I'm awake, and I can control that dream. I go inside of a room that only I can go into. I can call guides and helpers and the person that I'm healing in through doorways that I'm in control of. It's like I just run my hands down their body, and where my hands stop, in my mind, I then go in.
And that seems to be what happened with 16-year-old Daniel De Silva, the young man she'd never met and knew nothing about until we started taping this conversation.
I've got some question marks here.
You'll remember The only things Julie Lewin knows about Daniel are his name, his address, and his date of birth.
The back of your head, has there been a problem there?
Yeah.
And did that, I sort of feel that there's been a hole in the back of your head. Is that right?
Well, I had an operation and they did a bit of work on my back. They straightened out my spine and they did a bit of work on my head as well. They had to remove a piece of skull and replace it with some muscle. And there's a little bit of bone missing, so there's a bit of a hole in the back of my head.
Then I went down the right side of your face. The left shoulder at the front. And then I focused on your heart. Do you get tired easily? Fatigued if you walk any distances?
For about a year now, I've been getting really tired really quickly there.
I felt that at the back of the eye, the right eye, what I've written down here is pressure on nerves. I felt that there was some nerve damage possibly, and that something had been pressing and it was released, but the compression was still there. What else? And tension across the back, like on the shoulders.
Yeah, I've also had a lot of work done on my back with operations, and I had a bit of tension in my shoulder.
The heart? Was there any problem with the heart?
Yeah, well, I've never actually been told anything or really noticed anything with my heart there.
Just how accurate was Julie Lewin? We'll find out in a moment.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Daniel Da Silva is not your average 16-year-old. He's got a medical history that reads like a textbook, and he's undergone more operations than most people in a lifetime. But remember, Julie Lewin had never met him. So imagine his surprise when Julie diagnosed his medical condition simply by talking to him on the telephone. Immediately after that telephone conversation, Daniel tended to shrug off Julie's comments. At first, he concentrated on the negatives. He recalled for a start that Julie had somehow seen him as pale with long hair. Then he began to think back in more detail, with a more positive outlook.
Well, she told me about the hole in my head, and I was shocked. Like, no one could know that unless they've seen the x-rays.
Julie certainly didn't see the x-rays. We didn't until after the phone conversation. They reveal that Daniel does suffer from a rare condition that creates an excess of fluid on the brain. And he has had a series of operations to release the pressure of that fluid.
It's not like every person you come across has got this, so she couldn't have just guessed all the problems. She knew what was going on. I was 1 in a million type case. It was very rare. And besides the fact that I'm a boy and it's virtually never happened, it's mainly females that get the problems that I've had, or spina bifida people. But all the doctors were shocked. I was just a totally normal person with these problems, and they couldn't work out why.
And there was something else. Several times, Julie mentioned Daniel's heart. Nothing specific. It was just a feeling she had.
At the time, I didn't realise, but then later on talking with my mum, she made me remember that with my scoliosis, I was tilting down to the left and my ribs were closing in, and they were eventually going to crush my heart, and they would have killed me.
And Julie Lewin had never even set eyes on Daniel Da Silva. The sort of thing that would, at best, make doctors raise their eyebrows in disbelief. But not Dr. who cares for the terminally ill. He met Julie by chance and initially was skeptical, then fascinated.
to demonstrate her abilities. I mean, she sort of challenged me to ask her a question to see whether she could bring forth this talent that she had. And giving no medical details away, it was extraordinary in the fact that she was able to describe a particular patient that I treat with a very good accuracy as to the condition in which they currently find themselves.
After that encounter with Dr. Julie tried to use her talents to help the patient she described so accurately.
I later found out that the patient was, they expected that he wouldn't live through that weekend, and that was 4 or 5 weeks ago, and he's still alive, and the doctor feels that he's improved a little bit.
I wasn't stunned because I do believe that she does have a talent. I was intrigued, more from my own intellectual point of view, and intrigued to know what skills that she has, and I think she's intrigued to what degree she can use those talents in a positive way.
Yes,
And as for Daniel Da Silva, on the spur of the moment, during their telephone conversation, Julie suggested a form of meditation as therapy.
Down the numbers. Imagine that you're on the ocean and you're in a rubber raft. You know, if you just shut your eyes and you can feel that the ocean's just gently rocking you. Don't think of anything, just let it rock, and that'll take you into even a more relaxed state. And then just see your body covered in golden light.
She was asking me to try some forms of meditation. One was to give myself energy back, and another was just to help myself relax. And I haven't had the chance to try and use the energy replacement, but the relaxing one, I did it before I was going to bed one night. I knew it was time for bed, but I wasn't really that tired. And I started to try this meditation, and I just fell asleep straight away. And it's really helpful. When I think back, at first when she told me a lot of the stuff, I was thinking, I'm not really sure about that. But then when I spoke about it with my family, we worked out what it would have been and what it could have been. And it seems like she was pretty spot on with just about everything in the end.
Next week, we'll put Julie Lewin to the test again.
Hello?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes, it is.
Hi, Lynn, it's Julie Lewin.
Hi, Julie, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Okay.
What do you need me to tell you?
I just need your name, your full name.
And seek another medical opinion.
There's obviously some outside force at work that we can't account for, I don't think, in sort of ordinary medical or psychological terms.
Sydney boasts one of the world's great harbours, a spectacular haven for ships, a deep water port, the setting for some of the world's finest waterfront homes. But the sharp cliffs that guard the entrance to this magnificent harbour can also be a dangerous, deadly foe. Since Australia was settled more than 200 years ago, a place called the Gap has become famous, not for its role as a stunning sightseeing location, but as a place where people go to take their own lives. But the Gap was also once home to a genuine Australian heroine, a dog called Rexy. The raw beauty of Australia's east coast, a sheer drop from the jagged cliffs to the thundering surf below, a spectacular sight that attracts tourists from around the world, that also attracts the sad, the lonely, and the desperate. But for more than a decade, a German shepherd called Rexy maintained a lone vigil here, a vigil that earned her the undisputed title of the Guardian of the Gap.
And she was very, very gentle. If she did rescue somebody personally, it was always done very, very gently. She'd sort of kiss them and lick them and sort of, you know, it was like a mother. Beautiful dog.
Effie Nagy and her husband John were restaurateurs back in the 60s and 70s who opened the tavern perched at the very edge of the Gap. In its heyday, the Gap Tavern was the place to be seen, where Sydney society danced through the night, into the social pages the next morning. But despite its glamour, the restaurant owed much of its fame to Rexy, the wonder dog. During her heroic lifetime, Rexy was credited with scores of rescues, but the real number was more likely in the hundreds. She became an international media star and was the first German Shepherd in Australia to be given the Award of Merit, the canine equivalent of the Victoria Cross.
Rexy seemed to have like a sixth sense. If anybody put their leg over that fence, Rexy sensed that there was something wrong. She would come down to me, bark and carry on and literally drag me up to the top, and every time I went up, somebody was over the fence.
And that's exactly what happened the first time Rexy displayed her skills, more than 30 years ago. It was at a time when Effie Nagy and her husband were struggling to establish their tavern. A distraught Rexy bounded into the kitchen, barking uncontrollably. Effie was bewildered. It was unlike Rexy. She'd never ever done this before. Something told Effie Nagy there was an emergency of some sort. She had to follow the dog. And follow her she did, to the cliff face at the Gap. There she found a young man about to approach the very edge, determined to plunge to his death. It was only Rexy's intervention that saved him. The first of many, many people who would owe their lives to the guardian of the Gap.
She never bothered anybody but excepting if you went over that fence. And it was like as if she used to sit there and watch the people and see that everything was in order. And if it wasn't, she would interfere and just see to it that nothing happened to anybody up there.
But, strange as it may seem, the heroine of the Gap was not from an aristocratic background. This one-dog early warning rescue squad was totally untrained. In fact, she came to the Nagys as a bedraggled stray soon after they opened the Gap Tavern.
Rexy wandered in one day as a little puppy, and we just started feeding her, and we made inquiries if she belonged to anybody, seeing she didn't have a collar. And she didn't, so anyhow, she just kept on coming to the door. She loved my husband's cooking, apparently, loved the food. And anyhow, we sort of adopted each other.
But there was more to this relationship than an adoption of convenience. The bond between the Nagys and Rexy was as deep and as inexplicable as the dog's sixth sense. Effie Nagy remembers back 28 years ago to happier days, when she was expecting her son Mark and Rexy her first litter.
Both Rexy and I were enormous during our pregnancies, and I was working, and I was rushed to the hospital to have my son, and my husband brought me to the hospital, and then he went back, and exactly the same time, the doctor rang my husband up to tell him that he had a wonderful son. My husband had been helping Rexy give birth to 13 puppies. So he said, oh my goodness, he said, I've just had 13 puppies.
Remarkably, during her gallant career, Rexy never made a mistake. She was unerring. She knew somehow the subtle difference between a sightseer and a suicide. One of Rexy's last acts of heroism was a classic case in point. Again, she alerted Effie. Again, Effie followed her to the treacherous cliff face.
sure enough, on the cliff edge was a little lady sitting there, and we couldn't entice her to come up. And anyhow, the police asked me to help them with that rescue because being a lady, and I was talking to her and telling her it wasn't worth taking her life and so on and so forth, and Rexy was standing there next to me. And eventually we got this dear lady up, and the next morning the headlines was this lady had tried to kill her, or had killed her child, and then had gone to the Gap to commit suicide. But she was saved. And I think she tried twice afterwards, too. She escaped each time. But Rexy always seemed to save her life. And I think that was the worst one.
Rexy's long and distinguished life came to an end in September 1970, at the age of 13 years. It was a life she'd spent unselfishly patrolling the Gap. Her death was mourned by those who loved her, those she'd saved, and those who simply applauded the bravery of this one-time stray who became a saviour. Even in her last moments, Rexy created headlines. You see, she died giving birth. Rexy, true to her heroic form, lost her own life, but the pups were saved.
It's just an inborn thing with Rexy, and it's not something that you can train a dog to do. They have to sense it and feel it. I think we did try to train a couple of her puppies, but you can't train them. They have to sense it themselves.
Fantastic stories of close encounters and abduction by aliens. But few have attracted the serious attention of the scientific community until now.
The more common ones are into some kind of enclosure. They may see the UFO described with the lights around the rim and the dome on top, or cigar-shaped, different shapes, and they're taken through the bottom, usually, into a room which may be like an anteroom.
Stories researched and documented by a Harvard professor, psychiatrist, and Pulitzer Prize winner. Next time.
Remarkable real-life stories of people who say they've met aliens. Don't miss it. Also next time, the tale of Brownie. He was given up for dead. His owners said their goodbyes. He was buried. Then the next day, there he was, on the front porch. For now, good night. See you in the future.
The dog was laying on the ground in front of the steps, and his mom was laying by him, and I thought, oh God. I thought she had drug him up and was either mourning over him or gonna eat him. And I told the kids to stand, and he saw him. Toby saw his dog. He said, "There's my Brownie," and he got all excited. And I was just going to run up and grab him and get rid of him somehow.